Good afternoon to everybody on the East Coast and good morning to everybody on the West Coast. My name is Dwayne Weeks. I'm the Director of the Federal Transit Administration's Office of Planning and Environment, Office of Planning within FTA's Office of Planning and Environment. We're looking forward to announcing this 2021 funding opportunity for the pilot program for transit-oriented development for comprehensive planning around fixed guideway corridors that are for new fixed guideway transit projects that are in planning, design, or newly implemented. I will now hand over the presentation to April McLean-McCoy, who is also in the Office of Planning and is FTA's Program Manager for the pilot program for TOD planning.
Thank you, Dwayne. I will start with this disclaimer, which notes that the content of this webinar do not have the force and effect of law and are not meant to bind the public in any way. This document is intended only to provide clarity to the public regarding existing requirements under the law or agency policies. Grantees and subgrantees should refer to FTA statutes and regulations for applicable requirements of the TOD pilot program. My name is April McLean-McCoy. Before we get into the rest of the presentation, I will go over a few logistics. This webinar is being captioned and recorded, and we expect to have it posted on FTA's TOD pilot program website in the next few business days. I will present the information found on the next 16 slides and then hand it over to Walt Moki from the FTA Office of Program Management to present information that is specific to applying in grants.gov. At the end of the presentation, there will be a Q&A session, and Kim Cervenka, the previous TOD pilot program manager, will lead and provide the opportunity for you to ask questions. Throughout the presentation, you can type your questions into the Q&A pod at any time, but we do encourage you to wait until we finish with the formal part of the presentation, for some of the questions may get answered in the next 30 minutes. To turn on the closed caption function, please click on the three dots at the top of the screen labeled More Actions, and then click on Turn on Live Captions. Now let's begin. The pilot program for TOD planning was created under MAP 21 and continued into the FAST Act and provides grants for conducting comprehensive TOD planning at stations along new fixed guideways and core capacity improvement corridors. Nofo stands for Notice of Funding and Opportunity. So to save time in this presentation, I will shorten this to Nofo. On April 21st, we released our 6th Nofo, with applications due on June 21st. In the fall, we plan to announce the selected projects. This map shows the location for the 90 awards that were made in response to the first 5 Nofos, which totaled $80 million. We had good coverage across the country, with the 3 states having the most awards being California, Florida, and Texas. To learn more about these projects, please visit the website address at the bottom of the slide. The major objectives of the TOD pilot program are to encourage comprehensive TOD planning at transit station areas and corridors containing eligible projects, support TOD planning work that goes beyond what local agencies would usually fund themselves, encourage partnerships to maximize chances for successful TOD implementations. While reviewing applications in previous years, we ran into a situation where the proposed comprehensive TOD planning studies in the transit corridors were well thought out, but the transit projects in those corridors were not technically eligible. So I encourage you to please pay attention to exactly what is stated in the Nofo, as well as what is discussed during this webinar. The comprehensive TOD planning work must be associated with a new fixed guideway or core capacity improvement project, as defined in the Nofo. The transit project does not need to be in FTA's capital investment grants program. Also, as was done for the last 2 Nofo, the word new for a fixed guideway project includes projects that are still in the planning stage. already under construction, or recently opened to revenue services. Core capacity improvement projects are also new, regardless of when the fixed guideway service was first implemented. And we refer you to the Nofo for the definition of a capital investment that increases the capacity of the corridor by not less than 10%. As outlined in the Nofo, a good path to successful TOD implementation includes both the transit project sponsor and the land use authority or authorities for the corridor containing the transit project to work together on a TOD planning study. The first 3 bullets on this slide are showing the 3 situations that will occur for the actual applicant who is an FTA grantee. The applicant can include the transit project sponsor, the land use authority, or in some cases, the sponsor is also the land use authority. Please note, we are looking for only 1 application per transit project corridor. For it is a strong sign that appropriate coordination has not taken place locally if there are 2 separate applications for the same corridor. However, multiple corridors in a region are allowed, but each corridor needs a separate application. As outlined in the Nofo and aligned with the Biden administration Executive Order 13985, advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities through the federal government, Executive Order 14008, protecting public health and the environment and restoring science to tackle climate crisis, and Executive 13900, tackling the climate and crisis at home and abroad. This year, eligible activities should include policies that encourage TOD with the development of affordable housing, increase access to environmental justice populations, reduce greenhouse gas emissions and the effects of climate change, and supports equity and inclusion program plans or equity-focused policies. The work plan is a required part of each application. While there is a lot of flexibility about the type of work that is eligible and can be performed, you should make sure that the proposed work plan addresses the 6 aspects shown on this slide, which are identified in the Nofo and come from the MAP 21 statute that was carried over to the FAST Act. Examples of final deliverables are identified in the Nofo and include but are not restricted to comprehensive planning documents, corridor development policies, station development plans, zoning codes or resolutions, studies of financing strategies for TOD, including value capture, and resolutions to implement plans, policy, or financial strategies. The statute specifies these funds are only for TOD planning, TOD focused planning rather. So it is important for you to avoid ineligible activities in your work plan. Given how important this is to your application, I will quote directly from the Nofo. The eligible activities include TOD planning work in a certain transit capital project station area, transit project development activities that would be reimbursable under a FTA capital grant, such as a project planning, the design and engineering of stations and other facilities, environmental analysis needed for the transit capital project, or costs associated with Pacific Joint Development activities, capital projects such as land acquisition, construction and utility relocation, and site or parcel specific planning, such as the design of individual structures. If you want to ask any clarifying questions during the Q&A period, feel free to do so, or you can contact me via my telephone number or email. The award limits are $250,000 to $2 million, with a maximum 80% federal funding share. For information about the eligible sources for a non-federal share, please read the details in the Nofo. Using just one example, in-kind contributions are permitted, but transportation and development credits, previously referred to as toll revenue credits, do not. Details regarding pre-award authority will be provided when FTA announces the funding selection. Metropolitan transportation planning requirements also apply, where one example is that the awarded grantee will need to be included in the MPO's Unified Planning Work Program, or UPWP, before they receive FTA funding. This does not mean you must amend a UPWP right now before an application is submitted. Instead, this can be done after the awards are announced, but before FTA's funding for the award can be used. For your formal submission, we will not accept applications by email. You must apply through the grants.gov process. In just a few minutes, I will hand this over to Walt Mulkey of FTA's Office of Program Management to provide some additional information about applying for FTA grant opportunities in grants.gov. Although the application deadline is more than a month away, I do encourage you not to wait until June 21st. On our FTA TOD pilot program Nofo webpage, there is a link that will take you straight to grants.gov for the grant opportunity with the ID number shown on this slide. There is an SF424 mandatory form to fill out, as well as the attachments shown on the slide. For the applicant and proposal profile supplemental form, please make sure to use the current form and not what was available from any previous Nofos. The other attachments include a map of the proposed study area, evidence of partnerships between the transit project sponsor and land use planning authority, and documentation of the local, meaning non-federal, funding commitments. For the initial screening of all submissions, we are checking for eligibility of the applicant and the transit project, including evidence of a partnership, plus completeness of the overall application, including boxes on the applicant and proposal profile supplemental form to be filled out, which allows you to provide all the information shown on this slide, as well as other items that will be helpful to the review process. For those applications that pass the initial screening, we will have a team of reviewers who will evaluate each application according to those 3 criteria that are identified in greater detail in the Nofo. They include demonstrated need for TOD planning funds, strength of the work plan, schedule, and process, and funding commitments for the TOD planning work. Each technical review results in an overall score of highly recommended, recommended, not recommended, or ineligible, which is then passed along to FTA leadership. Once the technical reviews are completed, FTA will be looking at consistency with these departmental objectives and the support of executive orders, which I will show on the next 3 slides. The TOD program supports the President's Build Back Better initiative to mobilize American ingenuity to build a modern infrastructure and an equitable future. In addition, through promotion of increased access for environmental justice populations, equity-focused community outreach, and public engagement of underserved communities and adoption of equity-focused policies, reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and by addressing the effects of climate change, the TOD program and the Nofo advances the goals of these initiatives. Therefore, including EJ populations within the framework of the TOD proposal or your proposal is encouraged. However, a formal EJ analysis is not required or requested. In the proposals, we are really looking for information on environmental justice populations in your area as you define them, and how the project can benefit those populations. If you need additional information, you can refer to FTA's Environmental Justice Circular or the executive order listed on this slide. In addition to EJ initiatives, the TOD program also supports the President's Executive Order on Advanced Racial Equity, support for underserved communities. In the Nofo, under the Demonstrated Needs section, it states that planning proposals should highlight the extent to which TOD planning will resolve environmental justice and climate change challenges facing the region. We would like you to take this section into consideration when drafting your planning proposals. Similarly, the Nofo outlines steps to addressing the President's Executive Order on protecting public health and the environment and restoring science to tackle climate crisis and tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. For instance, in the schedule of work section, it highlights that proposed comprehensive planning work should reduce greenhouse gas emissions and the effects on climate change. We would like you to consider this item as well when drafting your planning proposals. At this time, I will hand this over to Walt Mulkey of the FTA Office of Program Management to provide more details about applying for FTA grant opportunities in grants.gov.
Thank you. At this portion of the briefing, I would like to present a orientation basically to the FTA website, as well as to grants.gov and the application process. Next slide, please. So FTA funding opportunities are published on the FTA website. We have Federal Register notices, as well as the opportunity is available on the grants.gov website. I recommend that the applicants begin their search and application process on the FTA Funding Opportunities Nofo webpage. Using the Nofo webpage as your start point provides you a link to related information and links to websites and resources to assist you in the application process. To locate the Nofo page on the FTA homepage, go to fta.dot.gov. From the top of the web page, click on Funding, and then select Applying, and then click Notices of Funding on the left side of the page. This Notices of Funding page provides you a link to all the current or active FTA opportunities that are available. Select the Nofo Opportunity ID. In this case, it's FTA 2021-004-TPE TODP. Click on that and you'll be sent via hyperlink to the FTA Nofo summary page. On the summary page, it's as depicted on the right side of your screen. The summary page, the Nofo, contains various links to bring you to the program page for this planning program, as well as the discretionary funding and soliciting applicant notices, and also you can search for expired notices if you wish. Next slide, please. The Nofo page contains a summary of the opportunity announcement, the various the important dates, and such as the application deadline, and a brief explanation of the eligibility requirements and the links to grants.gov. Additionally, it has FDA Supplemental Form, the Federal Register notices, and other relevant information about the programs which may assist the applicant in developing and submitting a successful proposal or application. A word about the supplemental form. It's a fillable PDF form, which is an FTA product. It is used to capture the key elements of the applicant's proposal. This form contains fill-in blanks for information, which will be used by FTA to evaluate the proposed projects and funding that's being requested. This form must be attached to the application in grants.gov in order to receive consideration. A word about these supplemental forms. Please do not use forms from prior years or attempt to create your own PDF form in lieu of using the provided supplemental form. Use the current form provided on the FTA website or in grants.gov. Do not attempt to attach images or scanned versions of the supplemental form for or pictures within that supplemental form. To navigate directly to the grants.gov site, click on the hyperlinked Nofo Opportunity ID shown on the right side of the screen. Clicking on that blue line, next page, will direct you to the grants.gov website and the specific opportunity ID. At the top of this slide, on the top left, this shows you the specific opportunity Nofo summary page in grants.gov. It contains the synopsis, a version history, and related documents, and also the application package itself, as well as the location where you would apply for this opportunity. The synopsis tab provides similar information which we publish on the FTA website, but also shows if there's been any changes in the interim prior to closing, since we posted the opportunity ID. The version history tab is just that, a history of any changes made since the original announcement. The related tab, the related documents tab, I should say, leads to a folder which contains required documents for your use. It contains the funding opportunity, it contains the Federal Register notice, as well as the supplemental form to be used for submitting for this opportunity proposal. The fourth tab, the package tab, contains the references and links to the grants to the download to apply for this opportunity. This is the tab you use to actually download the application package from grants.gov, as well as to move to applying for the opportunity within grants.gov. Please note that anyone can download an application package, but there are only specific individuals in an organization who have been designated in grants.gov as quote unquote authorized organizational representatives that can submit an application. So that's keep that in mind. Anyone can download the application package and review it. However, to submit, you must have specific user roles established within the grants.gov. Next slide, please. So here's a little more about the application package. It contains the SF-424, which is a basic information about the applicant organization and which is required by grants.gov as well as FTA. It also contains a anti-lobbying form, which must be completed and attached as well to your application package. And on the bottom right-hand side, you'll see the attachment form. This is used to attach not only the supplemental form, as well as other enclosures which you wish to include in with the application package when you submit through grants.gov. Note that the application package itself does not include the FTA supplemental form, and it is separate and must be attached to this form or the application itself. Next slide, please. This slide depicts a screenshot of the FTA supplemental form. To give you a little clearer view. It is basically, this is your proposal to the planning office for your projects. Each opportunity has its own forms. The supplemental form must be downloaded separately from FTA site or from within the related documents tab. It is to be attached to the application or attachment form, as I stated, and this is a way for applicants to include documents supporting all your application. Note that the supplemental form is a fillable PDF form used to capture the information we need for you to evaluate your proposed projects. Do not attach any scanned copies of the supplemental form, and it must be original form, and basically you have to type it in order to receive credit or to complete it correctly. Next slide, please. A word about grants.gov. So grants.gov, if you've not previously applied in grants.gov, you must visit grants.gov, and I encourage you to go to the Applicants tab. I would encourage you to review the Applicants tab in grants.gov to make sure you have the latest information about the application process within grants.gov. The tab will walk you through the process of registering on grants.gov if you've not done so before, as well as to help you check to make sure you have correct or compatible versions of Adobe Acrobat and other software. This will also provide you with training if you need on the use of grants.gov in the application process. There's also an Adobe compatibility check available on this site to make sure that you're using the correct Adobe version that's compatible with grants.gov, so you can attach the required forms to submit within grants.gov as well as to FTA. Next slide, please. This site is an organizational registration tab where new applicants can, if you've not previously applied for federal funds, you can actually register, obtain a DUNS number, register in System for Award Management, SAM, and obtain a DUNS number, as well as to establish an account within grants.gov. Next slide, please. Grants.gov works with organizations by creating a workspace that's made available for you to collaborate in the grant proposal process and with your team. If you can complete your application, proposal, and associated documents. It eliminates the need for emailing documents between team members. It just makes it much cleaner and easier to develop and proposals, and especially these application packages. The grants.gov has been enhanced to allow applicant organizations the workspace in which assigned individuals can collaborate. You can share files and perform varied tasks to develop the application. It is also the place from which the authorized organizational representative can submit the completed application to grants.gov. Please review the workspace information in grants.gov and identify the type of workspace and team members who will prepare your application. Please review the roles and privileges, and remember that only the authorized organizational representative can submit the application. FTA is accepting applications submitted via the grants.gov from organizations and not individuals. Such organizations must be registered in grants.gov. All the information and pertinent links are available on the applicant tab of the grants.gov site. Next slide, please. And here are the key elements or key web links for you to use in the application process. The grants.gov notice in funding opportunities, as well as the contact information for grants.gov in the event that you have encounter any issues. If you encounter any technical issues or problems while working on the application or submitting the application in grants.gov, I would recommend you do not attempt to contact the FTA staff for assistance. Instead, contact directly the grants.gov, either by phone or preferably by the email address provided, and they will respond to and assist you in completing and submitting the application. Only technical issues should be addressed to the FTA staff pertaining to the opportunity itself, or technical questions related to the Nofo. But all questions regarding the application process or problems with grants.gov should be addressed directly to grants.gov. Thank you. That completes my portion of the.
Thank you, Walt. Now at this time, we're going to read common questions. First question. When are the responses to this notice of funding offering due? The responses are due on June 21st of this year. The next question is, what is the maximum allowable period of performance if we get a TOD planning award? While the Nofo does not specify a time frame for completion of the proposed work, most competitive applications can complete their work in a 2 or 3 year time frame. If the proposed comprehensive planning work is expected to take longer than 3 years, applicants should make the reasons for this as clear as possible in the application. The next question refers to MPO and cities. Are MPOs and cities eligible for an award? Possibly. Applicants must be either the sponsor of an eligible transit capital project or an entity with land use planning authority. Applicants also must have been existing FTA grant recipients as of April 21st of this year. Most of the previous selected applications have had a transit provider as the grantee, with clear information provided on partnerships with one or more land use planning entities in the corridor. The next question is, if we get a TOD planning award, does this mean we must eventually pursue a capital investment grants CIG application? No, not necessarily. There is no requirement that your project be currently in the CIG program. Additionally, being in the CIG program or applying for a CIG program grant in the future is not a condition for receiving a grant from the TOD pilot program. This next question speaks to BRT projects. It states, we have a BRT service in operation that does not meet the fixed guideway BRT definition in the Nofo, but are considering a possible upgrade that will meet this definition. Would this project be eligible? Actually, yes. Applications for TOD pilot program grants who plan to convert shared right-of-way BRT to exclusive right-of-way BRTs are eligible, but this must be described clearly as possible in the application. For instance, the applicant must document that the majority of the project will operate in a separated right-of-way dedicated for public transportation use during peak periods. And the last set of questions before we go to Q&A includes this one. My agency received TOD pilot program funds under a previous funding opportunity. Are we eligible for consideration of another award? And the answer is yes. A project may be eligible for consideration, but applicants need to make it clear how the proposed work plans differ from the previous work plan. And then the last question that we have for the common questions section is there a minimum or maximum number of transit project stations that can be included in the comprehensive TOD plan? And the answer is yes and no. FTA is seeking comprehensive planning projects covering an entire transit capital project corridor, rather than a proposal that involved planning for individual station areas or only a small section of the corridor. However, the minimum number of stations that would be considered for an award is 2. There is not a maximum number of stations, but all stations must be in the same corridor. So at this time, I will hand the presentation over to Ken for Q&A.
Okay, thank you, April. Let's start the Q&A part of this webinar right now. As I'm providing some answers to what we've already received, feel free to provide some more questions. It's 2:40 p.m. now, and we can have another till 3:30, so I think we're fine on time. So what I'll do is I will read a question out loud, and if the answer is simple, I will provide it. If I'm not sure, I will ask Dwayne and April if they would like to answer. I will also pause slightly after I provide an answer in case Dwayne or April want to add more info, or if they think I might be misleading you in some way on being as clear as I can. So let's get going. I'm just going to start from the top and go on down. One question, there's actually 2 about this. Will the slides be available for download after the webinar? I already answered that in the Q&A, but what we'll say is that as soon as this webinar is over, that you can actually go to that same link where you got into the live event, and you can see the recording for this. The slides will be posted hopefully early next week on FTA's TOD website. Plus, we will post the captions for this webinar. So give us a few days to get those captions together. Is direct funding of real estate development permitted? Are joint development or leaseback arrangements okay? I'm going to make sure Dwayne agrees here. I think the answer to this is actually no. This funding is for comprehensive TOD planning, and based on the way this question is worded, it looks like you're looking at something more than that. So the answer to that is no.
That's exactly right. This project funding is for planning for corridors, for transit corridors, for transit-oriented development. It is not for any capital purchase at all.
Thank you. Is there a recommended template or language for evidence of partnerships between project sponsor and land use authority? The answer to that is really no. Based on winning applications in previous years, I mean, what we typically see would be, very clearly written letter that is attached to the application that makes it clear that that there's appropriate partnership activities going on. Next question: will the proposal evaluation metrics / element weighting be published anywhere? The answer to that is, I think I understand this question. The answer to that is no. What we're putting in the Nofo is we're identifying what are the 3 major criteria: the demonstrated need, the strengths of the work plan schedule, and the funding commitment. And when you read the Nofo, you'll see that we have various bullets under these in terms of what it is FTA is going to look for. So we're not posting any information about which of the bullets are weighted more than others. What we're expecting, though, is that you're gonna read everything we've written about these 3 criteria and do the best you can when you fill out your supplemental form in answering all those questions. Next is, can funds be used to pay for community engagement activities? Now, I believe the answer to that is actually yes. That this is really part of TOD planning. in fact, we very much encourage that there's a lot of community involvement going on that. Dwayne, I don't know if we want to get into specifics. I mean, there may be some aspects of that aren't covered, but I would say in general, I mean, we are encouraging a TOD planning effort to be used to have active public involvement.
Oh, absolutely. We want folks to really work with their communities, work with the disadvantaged populations, work with everybody in the corridor, gain consensus on what you want your future to look like with regard to transit-oriented development. So yeah, community engagement, public involvement, very important to TOD planning, and that's certainly an eligible activity.
Okay, the next question is asking again about the presentation, and we've I've mentioned that already. The next on the list is an at-grade station eligible for this grant? This station would assist in the rezone of the area to help accommodate for extra housing required by RHNA. The answer to that is if this is referring to an at-grade station that is an eligible transit project, a rail project, a fixed guideway BRT, the answer is yes, that it could certainly be an at-grade station. The next question is, can applicants apply for a raised planning grant and a TOD planning grant? I think the way I'm going to answer it and see if Dwayne wants to add. Well, you can certainly apply. What you're probably wondering is, well, are you gonna get two? Are you likely to get 2 awards for the same work? That probably won't happen. But I don't think that we. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure here, but I don't think we would restrict you from where you only apply for one of these and not the other. But please don't expect that you're gonna get funds for essentially doing the same work.
That's correct. I would encourage folks to apply for discretionary grant programs, provided that they have a good need for the funding, an eligible activity, and a solid work plan to do the work.
Okay. Sorry for the slight delay. The way that this live events work is we have questions come in that we have to decide whether to have them published. So, but I'll get back here. Let's see. So the next question is funding available for all sorts of transit corridors, including a BRT system without a dedicated lane? And would funding only be available if planning for the entire corridor of the BRT system, or could it be used if we focused on a portion? This question came in before we had gotten to the common questions. The answer to that it is, when it comes to BRT systems, the eligibility is based on this being a fixed guideway BRT. So if at least 50% of the BRT project does not have lanes that are dedicated to transit, then it actually would not be available. The second part is asking about focusing on just a portion, and April pointed out that while we are looking for comprehensive planning to be an entire corridor, we're not going to call this ineligible, even if there's only 2 stations that are part of the TOD planning. Next question is, how do we address the scalability question while still addressing the entire corridor? Well, kind of as we mentioned before, I mean, there's not a natural requirement that you include the entire corridor. So I don't want to speculate too much here on what you might do on the scalability, but I would think that in general, let's make up numbers. Let's say you have 10 stations, and you want TOD planning done for that. The scalability could be that you're proposing doing a little less work for each of these stations, or you might decide that instead of 10 stations, you're going to focus on, let's just say, the 8 that are most likely to be a TOD successful. So yeah, there's not a requirement that you always address every single station in a corridor. So, next question. So eligible projects already have to be in project development in order to qualify, correct? If yes, does being in a locally funded project development phase count? If yes, how far along do we need to be in project definition? Now let's be a little careful here. FTA has a terminology in the New Start, in the SIG program, about projects being in project development. Now there's not a requirement that you be in the SIG program, so you do not have to be in that definition of project development. This question seems to be more about, in general, how far along do you need to be with your planning? The most important thing here that we can say is that these funds are for comprehensive TOD planning. They're not for project planning. If you're in a situation where what we do expect here, and to make that clear in your supplemental form, that you're going to describe an eligible transit project. It could be there's still more planning that's going on with that project, but please focus your application on the funds you're requesting that are associated with TOD planning. If we apply for funding through the FTA Capital Investment Grant Program and then qualify for this FTA TOD pilot grant, do we need to be somewhere in the program funding pipeline, such as for project development through the FTA? Let's see, let me think a little bit about this. If we apply I'm going to provide an answer and see if Dwayne wants to add. It's kind of related to the earlier question that well, you actually don't need to be in FTA's project development process in order for you to have an eligible transit project. Dwayne, do you think I answered that one well enough?
Yes, I mean, the project needs to be a fixed guideway type project, right, with 50% of the right-of-way designated towards a public transit. The project that you're planning, and working on and everything, it is not required to be in a capital investment grants program, nor do you have to plan to be in the capital investments grant program, but it does need to be, a fixed guideway project with 50% of the right-of-way designated for the right-of-way for the guideway.
Right. The next question is traffic analysis, transit modal analysis, and modeling eligible activities for this grant? Only if these are really related very closely to TOD planning. I'm trying to think on the transit modal analysis. I don't mean to call on you all the time here for the tough ones, Dwayne. Do you want to take a shot at it, and I'll see if I can agree with what you say?
What we're looking for and what the statute is about, improving transit-oriented development in corridors with fixed guideway transit, and things that improve pedestrian and bike access, improve walk access, improve access through the transit-oriented development are fair game activities in terms of the comprehensive planning activities. If you're planning to do some kind of analysis, as part of your TOD work, that's perfectly fine. But if it's an analysis that's just going to stand alone to do a traffic impact or traffic analysis, then that's not really supporting transit-oriented development. It's got to be integral to the work program that results in a planning product that supports a future implementation of transit-oriented development or increased economic development or pedestrian or bike access or along these lines, mixed use development, but not purely a travel model or traffic analysis on its own.
I agree. I think that's a good answer. Next question is, we're working on our transportation master plan. would the cost of this be eligible? The only thing here would be if this transportation master plan, if there's comprehensive TOD planning work that is an integral part of that transportation master plan, that TOD planning work would be eligible. The way this question is worded, it would be too hard for us to say yes, because it's kind of general that no, I mean, any transportation master planning work done in a region would not necessarily be eligible. But if you keep this, make sure your supplemental form, what you put on there is making it very clear that that you have a need for TOD planning work to be done.
Yeah, just to add to that, we're not reimbursing for work that's already done or planning studies that have already been completed or things that are clearly already underway. We're looking for new planning studies that look at a corridor around fixed skyway transit. Mm-hmm.
Okay, very good. Can this funding opportunity be used towards further evaluation and planning of a new separated guideway project such as personal mass transit or personal rapid transit? I really don't think so. I mean, again, let's first of all keep in mind that this is a competitive process, and we're very much looking for the TOD planning. The way this question is worded, it's really about transit project planning, and it's really not focused on the comprehensive TOD planning. So unless Dwayne has something to add on that, I mean, I would have to say that we would discourage based on the way this question is worded, that it's really looking at some sort of maybe it's essentially transit project planning work rather than TOD planning.
Yeah, that's totally correct,
yeah.
Ken. This is not for transit project planning or alternatives analysis or refining mode or alignment. It's purely transit-oriented development, comprehensive planning type activities.
Right. Next question is, if a corridor received this funding in the past, is it still eligible to receive more funding for projects in that same corridor? Well, the answer is actually yes. What you need to do, let me see if there's two parts to this. Yeah, let's say that you have a particular corridor and you have applied in the past to do TOD planning for stations in that corridor, and now you're wondering if you can apply for TOD planning in that same corridor. Well, first of all, you can apply. The question here is the eligibility. The answer is actually going to be yes, but you're going to have to make it very clear in your application that you are now doing call it a higher level of TOD planning that was not TOD planning that was done in the original study. So I think that there have been some examples in the past where that's exactly what has happened. Next question. Can projects apply for an additional year for further project planning? Say the first phase goes towards public outreach and corridor plans. Second phase would be TOD, supportive land use and policies. Could both be approved even if you have already gotten the grant before? I'm going to provide an answer. Feel free to, if in fact, April, if you don't mind, show on the screen the last slide, which has your contact. I'm going to provide some answer here, but if you really need some follow-up, let's really get into the specifics of your situation. I'm trying to think in general what I want to say here. I think it's kind of like the previous question. You're thinking of a second phase that might be a future application. Can projects apply for an additional year for further project planning? Yeah, I'm going to interpret unless Dwayne, you see a different way to interpret the question. If instead of project planning, we're really talking about doing additional TOD planning, and that's the basis for essentially going after submitting another application, then yes, I mean it certainly would be eligible, but certainly make it clear in your on your supplemental form, you know, what is the value added services that you're asking FTA for. Let's see. Well, here's one I've never heard before. Can required matching funds be provided by philanthropy? I guess I'm trying to think here that, you know, I mean, this is a non-federal match, and I think I would be. The word philanthropy throws me a little bit, but if you throw in here that there's some private sector funding, yeah, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm thinking that if it's the question is, it's a local match, it's a non-federal match. I don't think that it necessarily has to be from a city or a government, that it could be from a private sector. I'm pretty sure that's right. Can you think, Dwayne? Am I misleading them in any way?
Yes, I mean, we have allowed for a variety
Yeah.
of non-federal funding to be used as local match for the federal share, private sector funding,
Right.
you know, but the applicant needs to be a government agency, okay? And
Absolutely.
you ought to demonstrate that that local match is committed to. You know, it's not a good idea to send in an applicant saying, if you get an award, so-and-so will chip in the local match. You know, it's good to have those kind of commitments right up front to have a competitive application.
Yeah, I don't think anyone asked a specific question, but we certainly would. In fact, I think we say it in the Nofo, but you know, when it comes, funding commitment is an important, local funding commitment is an important part of this, and make it clear to the reviewers that that, you know, if you do indeed have a commitment, you know, that it's probably a good idea to have a letter commitment attached to your application. Next question is, can you clarify the 2-station minimum? Is that to qualify as a corridor project or for all projects? Can the grant be for a secondary bus terminal only? If there's something very specific that you have in mind, contact April sometime next week, and we'll you know, tell her what is the specific situation. But in general, what we're saying is that, and I don't need to repeat everything that April said, but you know, while we are looking for comprehensive TOD planning for an entire corridor, you're still eligible if there's 2 stations in that corridor that will be subject to the TOD planning. Anything more I say on that one, and I think we need to know your specific situation to offer something useful to you. The idea of a secondary bus terminal, I mean, it's like, is that a bus terminal related to fixed guideway BRT? I mean, it's kind of looks like you're on the fringe there on this one. Next question. Previous TOD grant cycles included more guidance on required attachments. This cycle, it seems like attachments are limited to fewer items. Can we still attach project schedule and other visuals as part of describing the work plans? I think, yeah, I was obviously very involved with the last 2 Nofos. I think probably what you noticed is that in the previous Nofo, we wrote limit the application to 15 pages. We're not doing that this year. I do believe that we're asking for all of the same, you know, we're still asking for a map. We're still asking for the letters of funding commitment and partnerships. So I don't think that we're asking for anything less than that. The answer to that question of can we still attach project schedule and other visuals? Yes, you can do that. Even though we don't have the 15-page limit, I mean, please don't give us massive amounts of information. I mean, you know, you don't want to overload the reviewers. You know, please keep it concise. But but certainly if you want to provide a very a coherent schedule and provide it as an attachment, and you may want to provide something more than just the map of where the transit project is, feel free to do so. I got a slight delay here because I'm having to. I don't think you're going to see them on your screen. You may have noticed during the presentation that we would advance the slide on our screens, but it took about 10 seconds before you saw it, I think. So apologies for that. The next question on my screen, even though it may not be on your screen, is if the new transit project for fixed guideway systems is in the RFP stage, can you consider it as a new fixed guideway project? Let's see. When you say RFP, it sounds like, well, let me just kind of repeat here what April said is you know, a fixed guideway project can be one that is still in the planning stage, or it's in the construction stage, or it has recently opened. So if you're using the word RFP to indicate that if this is referring to RFP for construction, well, you're clearly into the you obviously have a clear idea what your transit project is. If the word RFP is really referring to starting some new transit project planning, you're probably going to get a little trouble there because it doesn't appear that you really advanced this far enough along, you know, that you have a pretty good idea of a fixed guideway system. Again, if the person who asked this, if you want to inquire more about your specific situation, then contact us and we'll see what we can do. The last question that I have right now available to me is what about walkability analyses? Are they eligible for support? This is similar kind of what Dwayne was saying on the traffic analysis. If this is walkability analysis that's associated with stations that are being part of the TOD planning work, I would say absolutely yes. You know, that this idea of pedestrian and bicycle access to transit stations is very important. So the way I interpret this question, you know, that it's very much a significant part of the planning effort. So that's the last of the questions. I think what I'm going to do is just wait a minute or two if someone has another question. I think that those have questions and you're not posting them now. Do keep in mind let's see, April, make sure I say this right. The deadline for the submission is I think it's like 11:59 p.m. on June 21st, correct, April? But please, you know, every year, every time we do these, we always get some people who are desperate that day. Something goes wrong, so please do not wait. Don't wait until that day. Please get your submission in early so that you know, you have a chance to correct anything that's wrong. I do have. Let me see. I have to check it out. Well, this is a weird one. I'm going to post it. April, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, someone says I can no longer hear Ken speaking. Am I the only one? Well, hopefully there's not too many people out there that aren't hearing me speaking. So I'm gonna hope that that's the case, that we're still live. Okay, so I don't see any other questions coming in. Dwayne, I think I'm going to hand it over to you to kind of give a closing some closing comments.
Yes, thank you, Ken. Thank you, April. Great job. Thank you for all your thoughtful questions that you submitted during the webinar. If you come up with additional questions later, please reach out to April McLean-McCoy, either by email or the phone number posted here, and we look forward to receiving your applications, and good luck. Thank you, everybody, and have a great weekend.